Hello. I'm Celeste, and this is Week by Week. On today's episode, I start off with a conversation with my husband where we dive into self-care, and then later on, our guest is the wonderful Sonja Ecklund. Here we go. I wanted to talk to you about the topic of self-care and taking time for yourself. And I think that there are a lot of different versions of this conversation that we could have. So I'm going to talk specifically about just like the little things you can do throughout the day to just get a breather and how to kind of prioritize adding those into your life. So for me personally, after I had a conversation with my guest this week, I spent a lot of time thinking about how I wanted to add mindfulness more actively back into my life. So since that conversation, I've been meditating every single day. You have also joined me in that. We don't meditate together, but we're independently meditating throughout our day.
Most days you are much more consistent than I am, but I'm probably at like 80% of days, I would think.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's about finding the balance that, fits your life. But I have found it to be such a good way to slow down, take a breath, and do something that feels specifically geared toward me. That doesn't take a lot of time and gives me a moment to reset. And I did not know how much I needed that time until I started to take it. It was one of those things where I was like, go, get everything done. For the most part, enjoying my days, but just not really realizing that I never had the gear in my day of just slow down, take a moment and breathe. So I wanted to talk about some of the things that have come up for me since starting to do that, but I also wanted to get any hits you have on self-care or anything that's come up for you in taking some time to add mindfulness to your day. Do you have anything you want to start with?
Yeah, I think that meditation / mindfulness has been a great addition to my, pretty much day to day. There was a stretch of time where I had a lot of kind of anxiety around. We just had a lot swirling around. We had visitors, we had work was being done on the house, and I had a lot of work happening, and you had just started kind of doing this more in your day to day. It really helped me to ground myself and to just, find a little bit more of a through line for my own self and my own mind and just kind of being a little more grounded during a pretty intense time. So that was so helpful, especially at a heightened time. And then it's continued to be something that I really enjoy when I'm doing it. The other thing that I have done for quite a long time since our son was born is that I've tried to do as much as I can mini workouts. So it's like 5 to 10 minutes where I try to do just a couple of sets of something just so that I'm being consistent with my body. There could be something in the microwave and I do a little mini workout, or you are nursing our son for a minute and there's just a little space, like I'm in the other room and I can just do something simple. Am I in the greatest shape of my life? No, but at least I'm feeling like I'm doing something and carving out, some self-care space for myself. And, you can get a lot done in 5 to 10 minutes of a little quick workout. So those are two places that I'm trying to do it.
I think something that's really struck me over this time is you are not going to have a day where it feels like the perfect conditions to do anything. It's like you're never rested enough to feel like you want to do a workout. You're never totally centered enough to feel like you're in the perfect headspace for meditation. The conditions are never going to be your ideal. And so it's just, as you were saying, consistency of for me, if I can say I'm just going to do this, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm not going to judge what it is. I am committed to taking this space for myself. And I think that can be huge. That for me has been the empowering part, I think, of it, because it is so easy to start feeling like you have no space for yourself. And before I had our son, I really promised myself, I'm not going to let go of self-care, or self-care is caring for everybody else, or whatever kind of mantra you have about it. And then you get into it. And it's like, it's the first thing to go. And you don't even think about it. It's not even conscious. It's just like, well, everybody else needs something and I can cut this out and survive. So that is the thing that's going to be cut out. That's why I think I've been so consistent with meditation, because I'm just like, you know what? 10 to 15 minutes, no judgment of how it goes. If I can't focus, I don't care. I'm just going to focus on my breath and be there and show up for myself in that way for just a short period of time every day.
And having a practice, quote unquote, a practice, whatever it is for anybody, a walk, bike ride, swimming, doesn't have to be physical. It could be reading. It could be writing, playing a musical instrument. It could be bird watching, anything. If you carve that out and you make it something that's consistent in your life, it gives you balance. It gives you ballast as you are dealing with all of the ups and downs of it all the day to day.
Yeah. Another place that I have tried to be intentional about taking space for myself has been around sleep, and has been saying like, I'm going to go to bed at 10, and I'm going to build out more of a nighttime routine, and, building a pattern around it, I think ultimately has helped focusing on myself and taking time for myself. That and eating a lot of cake. Lots of dessert in this house.
Maybe your practice is eating a lot of cake. Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me too. Honestly, should we Postmate some cake tonight?
You're damn right we should.
The other thing, okay, so the two other things I mentioned, not judging the quality of taking this time, but also I'm really, really, really working on judging myself less overall. And I think in training my mind not to judge how even a simple task like meditation goes, it has been a place for me to at least expand that conversation in myself of like, what are other ways that I don't need to judge myself as much? And can I just accept where I am and show up where I am on any given day, and have a little bit more acceptance around that idea? So I think that just even being able to float those ideas in my brain and feel like I'm building my relationship to those concepts has been really big.
Yeah, it's huge. I'm on my own journey with that thought, but I have a lot of respect for how much intention you're having around that, and I know that you do. One place that I am trying to activate that is how I orient to our son and how I react to him and give him space for who he is and how he is. I'm really trying to do that for him. So maybe I can help parent the child in him and the child in me at the same time.
He says it like a joke, but it's true. And I think you're doing an excellent job in that. And I love how intentional you are about that. And it's something that I think we're both really committed to, which is giving him space to have his own experience without, our judgment on what it should be. Something that's really struck me as we've started having different conversations about how we talk to ourselves or how we judge ourselves is I've been very aware about how judgmental I am of myself, and really feeling in this last kind of couple years how much I want to expand that place in myself. I think when you are focused on that, it can be easy to forget or not see sometimes the struggles of the people around you. And especially when you think everybody else has it more together than you, or they have traits that you admire. And a blind spot in that can even intensify further when it's your partner, because I think a lot of times you pick partners who have qualities that you find admirable. And so what I wanted to say on that is like, you've been opening up more about this place in you recently, and some of the places where you're hard on yourself. And I just appreciate that. And it's been a really good reminder for me about staying curious. And I think it's something that I try to stay committed to in general, but then there will be those places where you have blind spots. So it's a good reminder for me to like check in with you about this stuff. My point is just like, thank you for sharing with me, and thank you for the reminder to stay curious.
Thank you for the same reminder. You're always reminding me that very thing as well.
Aw. It sounds silly, but it's one of the things that excites me the most about taking this journey with mindfulness has been I'm really, really enjoying having reminders to breathe. When you're stressed, when you're tired, when you're activated, when anything is going on, I've just been realizing how much I hold my breath throughout a given day. And just to take a pause and give myself a little bit of buffer time before I respond to something, or to check in with myself in that time and see where I am and what's going on. It's been so nice to just take a deep breath. Even when I'm nursing now, or especially the last one at the end of the night when we're winding down and it's his last feed before bedtime, when I set my phone aside and just take a time to breathe, I've been doing a lot of the square or box breathing. Do you know what that is? That 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. It's been a really great exercise for me to relax. I feel like my son relaxes a little bit, just like feeling my body relax. I know we all know it on some level, but when I am off social media, boy, does it help my mental health. And it's, just find the right balance, obviously. And I don't know if I found that place yet, but it is nice to have something else to tune into, not just mindless scrolling.
I respect and admire you and all the ways you go about your journeys.
That's so nice. Thanks, baby. Our guest today is Sonja Ecklund. Sonja is a national board certified health and wellness coach, a yoga teacher, a financial wellness professional, a low impact minimalist, a debt-free lifestyler, and a houseplant enthusiast. She has over 9 years of coaching experience in both corporate wellness and private practice. She empowers people to create mindful, sustainable, and intentional lifestyles through the power of coaching. I also have known Sonja since I was born and was at her house when my sister was born, and she's just been a lifelong friend, and we've seen each other through so many phases of our lives. And I'm so excited to share this interview with her. She has so much compassion and insight, and also gives some really great thoughts on how to have great conversations with your kids. I just can't speak highly about her enough. So here's Sonja Ecklund. I totally dorked out on your materials that you've released to the internet. So you have a financial workbook, you have a living minimally ebook, and then you have some templates as well to give a more organized and mindful way of looking at your goals or your weekly schedule. One thing I was struck by was that your questions are so compassionate and feel really engaging in a way that I normally don't feel when thinking about finances. So I was just wondering, like, when you start to think about the questions you're asking yourself, do you have a method of like what you start to look at or how you navigate that?
Yeah, thanks so much. I like to create tools that people can engage with on their own. I know that not everybody wants to work with a coach one on one, and I know that not everybody can necessarily afford it. And I do what I can to make my coaching really accessible. But one of the ways I do that is by creating workbooks that essentially ask similar questions to what I would ask an individual in a coaching session. But it's something that they just engage with on paper instead of in a two-way conversation. So when I write questions based on anything, on any of the workbooks that I've created, my first thought is always, how can I help this person increase self-awareness? How can I help an individual better understand themselves? Because once we understand ourselves, it changes everything about the way we interact with the world around us and the people in our lives.
I love that so much. What was your journey toward kind of self-awareness or feeling more comfortable and knowing what's really going on inside of you?
I think that's always been something that's been really deeply within me. I feel like I've always known myself really well and just kind of known who I am, what I stand for. I feel like I have had a really strong set of values from like a very young age. So I think it's something that's really natural to who I am. But as I grew up and grew older and went through school, I just realized how much of that was missing from the world, from friends that I interacted with, and from sort of traditional schooling around health and psychology, which is what I studied in school. When you understand yourself better, it truly does just change every relationship you have, the way that you look at things, the way you perceive situations. I think that I really started to turn the volume up on that and look more deeply into it in high school when I felt very alone. Like I didn't have a lot of friends in high school. I wasn't popular. I had a hard time fitting in, and I wanted to be popular. I wanted to be able to fit in, and I couldn't. And so I started looking within myself and trying to figure out, why is this hard for me? And looking back on it now, I think that what I can say is that the struggle was, I wanted to have depth of relationships that my peers didn't really want to have. And I think that stemmed from the fact that I've just always been sort of a person who's introspective and self-aware and loves to learn about myself and other people.
Mindfulness is such a great tool. And like these introspective traits are so important and great. But when you're activated, when you're in a place of like loneliness or anger or sadness, I feel like those tools are the first things to fall away. Now, kind of deeper in your journey, when you find that you're getting activated, is there a way that you kind of feel the stability or like are able to pull those things in and not lose sight of those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a two-part answer. The first is that I learned to be okay with the full spectrum of human emotion. I learned to figure out how I could embrace moments when I was feeling sad or angry or full of grief or nervous or whatever negative emotion that I might have previously thought was a really bad thing. I learned how to leverage those things. I learned how to listen to those things and to use them as teachers and guides to help me better understand myself. The second part is that the tools that I've created, specifically the sort of weekly planning tool, is something that I use to continue to create self awareness and to develop patterns and trends and notice things about the way that I'm feeling and what my emotional experience is like. And that's been a really helpful way for me to just continually engage with my own well being and continue to get to know myself.
Is there anything recently that you've discovered about yourself that surprised you?
Yes, actually, I came to a conclusion a couple of days ago that drinking at this phase in my life doesn't serve me. And I've noticed a pattern actually in the past couple of times that I've, had 2, 3 glasses of wine, that I end up feeling really down and almost depressed. And that's a new development. That's not something that I previously experienced when I drank. And so now that I have this awareness, which I have because I write things down and I track how things are going, I'm suddenly aware of this new piece of information that I think is really going to serve me moving forward. I think making any decision as like a black and white choice that you're going to pursue for the rest of your life is a recipe for failure. And I think that when we can look at something as just new information and helpful information, that helps me remove the pieces of judgment from it. And what's interesting is I think there probably was a point in my life where I would have noticed this pattern and thought, how could I not have figured this out before? When I noticed the pattern this time, the first thing that entered my mind was, I'm so grateful that I figured this out. And so I think that that kind of attitude of gratitude is definitely really helpful when noticing something that maybe is something you could judge yourself for. Yeah, and I think that as we continue to adopt things with a spirit of just for now, that can be really helpful because phases of life change and things don't always stay the same. And we don't know what we don't know.
Yes.
So until we learn new information, how could I ever have known that without, researching and being introspective and looking at my own behavior and putting together some patterns?
Being able to look at yourself with curiosity and kindness strikes me how important that self talk is and like how you actually address yourself. This segues nicely into the concept of like, I'd love to talk to you about how to have some conversations with your children and how to start building really great foundation for self talk, for psychological health. I have a list of words that came up when I started thinking about things that I want to talk about with Dash.
Hmm.
I would just love to hear kind of how you think about maybe using some of these tools through coaching or through some of your own insight toward conversations with our children.
I mean, I think about growing up and like we had wonderful parents and especially really, really wonderful moms who were just like beautiful role models and examples for us. And yet, I think that there was maybe some opportunity for like more role modeling of really positive self talk. And that's just a product of the times, nothing personal. But I think that now that we're in 2021, where people are starting to realize that this stuff really matters and makes a big difference, I think it's just so cool that parents are trending towards wanting to model this for their children. And I think that's that's where it begins. It begins with modeling it for your children. It doesn't begin with teaching your child these concepts. It begins with showing your kid what it is that you can do for yourself, because we know kids mimic our behavior. They see and they notice everything we do. And so when we can show up for ourselves in really kind and compassionate and curious ways, that will mean that your kid will mimic that behavior and start to do that for themselves. So it's more like a teach by example rather than like teach with a lesson.
I was wondering if you can tell me like what tools you can kind of point people toward that are like ways to start incorporating more self-care or more things that they can model for their children if they already are kind of taxed or, tired or in the throes of whatever life is giving you.
Definitely. So I think there are a couple of different ways we can go with that. The first thing I'll say is don't underestimate the power of working with a coach. Having someone to talk to and having someone to hold you accountable to creating behavior change is so powerful. And that's really the essence of what a coaching relationship is, where the coach is using particular strategies and skills to elicit your inner wisdom and help you figure out what it is that you want out of life. And then the coach's role is to help synthesize that perhaps into a goal, perhaps into a vision, a small step, whatever that might look like for the relationship that you have with the coach. And then the coach will help hold you accountable to making sure that you follow through and that you're getting the results that you want. And that is such a powerful thing, that accountability and that like one-on-one dedication. That's not something that we think of as something to give to ourselves as parents, right? You do think that the most natural thing, of course, is to take care of your kid first. But I really think that reinforcing this concept of taking care of ourselves so that we can take care of our kids is vital. When we think about some strategies that might be like tangible takeaways for parents, I think the first thing that I would say is don't underestimate what you're already doing. I think that self care can look like so many different things. And when we envision self care, we think about a fancy bubble bath, we think about a trip to a spa, we think about these like sort of indulgent things. But self care can also look like taking a deep breath, drinking a cup of tea, a sip of tea. It can look like just a moment where you are appreciating something about your child, telling your child something you're grateful for. It can be so many different things. The idea of self care is really to give yourself that moment of compassion and kindness and slowness and maybe even forgiveness to help you
Mm.
just be more present and more in the moment. And I think when we look at it that way, it feels much more accessible than the fancy bubble baths or things like that. And there's a huge variety of grounding tools that people can use that are related to either breath work, different types of breathing, or, different types of visualization or guided imagery, progressive muscle relaxation, like things that you can truly do while you are engaging with kids or with activities you're doing as a parent around the house or whatever it is. There are lots of things that you can do that are just like simple and in the moment that don't take up a lot of time.
Something I've thought about a lot is like the full spectrum of the human emotions. I want to be able to model that in a healthy way and an age appropriate way for Dash, but I want to show him like anger is not bad. The way that you respond to anger can be. Having an angry response is actually like just part of the whole thing of being human. And here are healthy ways to explore anger, or even like on the most bare bones level, like where are you feeling the anger and what does it feel like in your body and what color is it? Do you have any tools or thoughts around like ways to kind of integrate healthy emotions or modeling of emotions for your children?
I think the best way to do that is exactly like you just said. It's asking open ended questions. It's getting
Mm.
curious with your child. It's finding out more about what's going on for them. I think the natural tendency for a lot of people is to see a child who's angry or sad and to say, stop it, right? Especially if it's in public where maybe we're experiencing some shame or guilt or whatever emotion might be coming up for us. I think it's natural to want to stop the behavior and not really address the behavior. And I think the healthiest thing we can do is ask some questions and find out what's going on right now and what
Mm.
do you need? The question that I love to ask people within self care is, what do I need? So that's a mantra, really, that I think anybody can adopt and start to ask themselves. And I think that self-care really looks like asking yourself that question and then giving yourself permission to respond with whatever it is that you need. So saying, what do I need? Answering that question and then giving yourself that thing. And I think we can respond to children in a very similar way. We can ask the child, what's going on for you? Tell me a little bit about how you're feeling. Asking that question, like you said, where are you feeling this in your body? What color is it? What does it look like? Something like that is building self awareness. It's helping your kid
Mm.
develop information about themselves, and that information will serve them in ways that we probably don't even know.
On that note, I have two questions surrounding shame, which kind of came up in this last answer. When you're having an experience and your child's having an experience and something like shame comes up, but you know that's not the way that's going to get them to feel heard or move through that experience in a way that feels productive and healthy, how do you differentiate yourself enough so you're not just projecting your experience onto them, or you're not kind of like meeting that emotion that they're having with your own kind of shame or whatever that might be?
The first thing that came to my mind was empathy. How could we respond to that with empathy? I think it's very normal. Like, let's take the example of a screaming kid in Target who's like really upset. I think it's very natural and normal for a parent to feel some embarrassment, maybe some shame, maybe some guilt. Who knows what they might be experiencing? But I think first and foremost, I would like to invite that parent to ask themselves, how can I respond to myself with some empathy here? And then
Mhm.
how can I respond to my child with some empathy here? Because again, if we don't first ask ourselves what we need and first give ourselves what we need, we can't really give the best version of ourselves to our children. So I would say that any time that you can respond with empathy, that will give you enough pause to slow down and think about how you truly want to react in the situation. Easier said than done, but that's what comes to mind for me.
I would love to just unpack how to have conversations or build structures for less shameful lives for our kids and for ourselves, quite honestly. I would love to hear just how you define shame and what that means to you.
Yeah, so I think defining shame can be really personal and it's sort of a nebulous concept. I think it's really important that we distinguish between shame and embarrassment. Those aren't the same thing. And then, same thing with shame and guilt. Those are three words that we kind of use synonymously, but they're three separate emotions. And I think that the best way to figure out what shame means for you, and similarly, how you can differentiate between shame, embarrassment, and guilt, is to start asking yourself the questions we were just talking about asking to your kids. What does shame look like for you? Where do you feel it in your body? Brene Brown asks some really great questions about, like, what color is it? What does it taste like? When we can start to engage all of our senses in the experience of understanding an emotion, we understand ourselves way better. And that makes it easier for us to show up with empathy.
You've talked about using some of your coaching techniques to have conversations with kids. Are there any tools that you can give any parents listening that you think would be helpful in facilitating conversations or building foundations for their conversations?
Definitely. I think the first one would be active listening.
Mm.
So, what that looks like is it might be as simple as what you just did, saying something affirming like, or or something that gives space and invites more. When we can invite our kids to continue talking, we learn so much more from them. And I think there's this really natural tendency to want to give an answer or like find a shortcut or get to the next thing. And when we can be patient enough to just really listen to what it is that a kid has to say, we can learn a lot from them, and then they can learn a lot from themselves, and they can learn what it's like to be heard and what it's like to be listened to, which is a lesson that a lot of us learn way later in life. And wouldn't it be great if we could teach that to kids right away? So I think active listening is a really phenomenal tool. Another example of how active listening might show up is through simple reflections. So, saying, I'm hearing you say this, or it sounds like this is what you're experiencing, and just confirming that you're hearing correctly. We all make a lot of assumptions based on the information that we're taking in and what we're hearing other people say. And it can just be really nice to clarify and make sure that we heard correctly before we move on with the next question. I think the other piece of active listening that I'd love to talk about is open versus closed ended questions. So, something like, how was your day? Can be an open ended question, but it also can be a closed-ended question because it's really asking something pretty simple. How was your day is often going to lead to an answer like good or bad. So instead of asking something like, how was your day? Asking something like, what was the most interesting thing that happened to you today? Or what was the best moment of your day? Or something that invites more conversation, again, creates that environment that helps a child recognize that we want to hear what they have to say. Again, that creates that experience of them knowing what it's like to be listened to and heard. It's so important that we nurture that sense of curiosity and that we don't squeeze it out of our children as they age. It's so important to make sure that we're continuing to nurture that curious and open mindset because that is how we learn and that is how we grow. And that doesn't stop once you grow up.
Curiosity and kindness. Those are just the things that I just keep returning to. And I've been reading too, there's so many stats of like, you'll ask a bunch of kids a question of like, what do you think your parents value in you? And they will say achievement in schools. And you ask their parents and they say kindness. And it's like, there's something that's not translating between these things that we're supposed to hold or the things that we are holding to importance. I'm going to just pick your brain because I feel like you have so many proactive tips to implement. Are there other ways in either demonstrating kindness to yourself or showing kindness to your kids that you feel like can help breed that dynamic?
I'm big on taking a moment to acknowledge kindness when I see it in the world.
Mm.
So, really calling out to someone like, hey, thank you so much for giving me that compliment. That really made my day. Something like that helps reinforce the action that that person took. And I think that when we can continue to affirm kindness and continue to affirm examples of compassion that show up in the world, that just makes it so that people want to continue giving it, which ultimately is a recipe for helping to make the world a better place. I think when we can just continually recognize it in ourselves and in other people, that can be really powerful. So, complimenting it and affirming it using positive reinforcement to just help kids understand that that's a really great behavior that we'd like to continue to nurture. I think that's the key.
It's also, you have to be open to receiving it.
Yes.
And that's the thing that I think is so hard, especially I think, unfortunately, for women, but I think for everybody, I know people have different experiences with it. And like to really hold that and receive it is a really powerful act, both for you and the other person.
It's so natural for us to deflect it and to say, like, I didn't do that. We downplay ourselves and we downplay our own accomplishments and achievements. And the moments when somebody else does recognize us for something that we've done well are just beautiful, delightful moments that I would like to encourage people to relish in and really like nourish in themselves. A challenge that I love to give my clients is take a compliment this week. The next time somebody says something nice to you, say, wow, thank you so much. And just end the sentence there.
That reminded me, in your workbook, you have a whole page of challenges.
Mhm.
Is there anything around kindness, compassion, listening, childcare, or parenthood that you could give a challenge to my listeners?
It's interesting to come up with something that kind of encapsulates like kindness, compassion, forgiveness, self love, self care, all of those concepts into one thing. But I actually think that the challenge I would like to pose to your listeners is around gratitude.
Mm.
When we practice gratitude on a daily basis, we create new neural pathways for noticing gratitude in the future. And so we're priming our brains to be more aware of gratitude and to notice it more quickly. And I think such a powerful activity to sit around the dinner table and just ask, what's something you're grateful for today? And it can be anything. It's a great way to nurture curiosity, creativity, and just to learn more about what it is that people in your family notice. I think that can be such a fun and interesting exercise. And that's actually something I do with my mom and my stepdad, my brothers, and my brother's girlfriends, like sitting around the table and asking, what are you grateful for today? Just listening to what it is that they have to say because everybody notices totally different things about the world around them. Just like self care, gratitude is one of these concepts that people think it needs to be something really big or really extreme. And it actually can be something as simple as interacting with a color that you really enjoyed that day or seeing a turtle outside or whatever. Like it's just these small, simple things that make you feel happy and content and grateful for your senses, for the world around you, for your body, for whatever it might be. And it is just such a fun and interesting way to learn about other people and to just bring it down to a really tangible level instead of feeling like it's inaccessible to us.
Do you have a self-care ritual or a gratitude ritual that you do every single day?
I do, yes. So something I designed that's in my Etsy shop is a 365 day of gratitude poster, essentially. So I have mine in a frame hanging on my wall, and I have a Sharpie that just sits on top of the frame. And every day I write something in this little box that I was grateful for. And at the end of the year, I spray the whole thing down with spray cleaner and I start over. So I just write on it with the Sharpie and just note whatever it was that stood out to me that day that made me feel grateful, happy, alive, content. It doesn't always have to be like something novel. It's oftentimes something really, really small, but it adds up and it makes a huge difference. So that's something I do every night right before I go to bed.
I love that so much. I feel like you show up in the world with such authenticity. For me, when I'm not bringing myself to the table, that's when I feel the most like, who I didn't like that interaction. I didn't like how that went. How do you show up with authenticity that I see?
That's definitely something I try to do. And at the same time, it's something that comes really naturally to me because I have done the work to figure out who I am. And then I've given myself permission to be exactly who I am. So I think something that stands out to me is that I'm a really creative person. I have a bazillion ideas at all times. And I've just accepted that that is like part of who I am. And that sometimes that makes it hard for me to sit through a meeting and not be a little bit distracted from time to time. I've allowed myself that permission to engage with my creativity and to engage with all of my emotions and to learn from every experience that I have. I think one way that I have really cultivated that sense of authenticity is by asking myself, what did I learn? Going back through every moment, every day, good and bad, and asking myself, what did I learn? And having that sort of curious growth mindset around just lifelong learning has helped me stay in a place where I can feel like I'm being really true to myself. And one thing that's different about the planning tools that I have designed is that there's space for reflection at the end of every week. There's an opportunity to think through, what did I notice? What did I learn? What do I need to change? What did I give to myself this week that worked? What didn't work about this week? Those types of questions that invite you to really think through what you need. And then that can help you create a new plan for how you'd like to move forward and how you'd like to continue to show up in the world.
So it's getting to be the end of the week. Do you have any reflections that you could share with us from your own experience?
I'm always working on work life balance. I love to work. I love my job, my corporate career, and I love my private practice and my design work and everything I do in my free time. And I can spend a lot of my time dedicated to working. And so a constant takeaway for me is, what boundaries do I need to set for myself so that I can continue to show up authentically and make sure that I don't go into a state of burnout? It's really easy to almost wrap our identity up into what we're working on or what we're doing. And I think that's actually a common theme between, that kind of career oriented focus that we're talking about and parenting, where it can be really easy to lose yourself in the job of taking care of your kids. And then if your kid does something that's maybe disappointing to you, it's hard to not take that on and feel like it's your responsibility or your fault. And, I imagine that the burnout point in parenting can be a challenging thing and kind of like a moving target that changes based on your own resilience and based on what you're doing to take care of yourself. So my stance on burnout just in general is, how can I be as proactive as possible in taking care of myself so that I can continue to do all of the things I love to do without getting to a point where I begin to resent those things?
Something that you said in there too is like the idea of, what is my identity outside of these things? And I think it is very, very hard to untether yourself and say, like, what am I as this entity? And then who am I inside of this entity? I am a mom, but I'm also me, you know?
Yes. Something that I do is I keep a list of fun facts about myself in my phone. So the idea is that in those moments when you begin to lose yourself in work, in parenting, in accomplishments, achievements, whatever your plight might be, to be able to look back on things that are just true to you, unique things about you that are independent of anything else. And so they can be things as simple as like what your favorite color is. What tastes do you love? What's your favorite time of day? But also things like weird, silly things that you've kind of done in your life or in the past that might make for a good story to share with your kid later on. Things like that that are just like kind of fun pieces of your identity that are fun to capture. And I actually got this from listening to my mom, who is just my favorite person in the whole world. And she tells stories sometimes about like things that happened to her as a child or as a teenager or jobs she had that are like, what? Or just really interesting, fun things about herself. And she strikes me as a person who just knows who she is and has never lost sight of being an individual person while working, while being married, while having children, and, devoting a lot of her life to taking care of kids. And I started making a list based on what I had seen in her, and then realized that it would be a helpful thing for me to maybe do for myself so that I could stay grounded in my own identity when I get too wrapped up in work.
You have so much depth of knowledge in this like mindfulness realm. What inspires you? And then what has helped you kind of build this toolbox you have?
My first thought is that most of it comes from within. I find that when I start looking at other people and start looking to other people as role models or things like that, that I start comparing myself and that I
Mm.
get kind of intimidated. So I think there's a difference between this concept that we've been talking about like leading by example versus like looking to someone to teach you the concepts. And that's kind of a fine line. It's sort of nuanced, but I find that I draw inspiration from just curiosities all around me. I draw inspiration from gratitude and from the experience of just getting to know other people and leaning into that curiosity about wanting to know more about other people and things in the world. And I think that's where a lot of my personal mindfulness has come from, more so than a role model.
I think when we're anxious, we start to look for other people for answers. And I was wondering, like, what is your relationship with anxiety?
Anxiety and I know each other very, very well. It's something that I have struggled with for many years. And it's something that the coaching tools that we've been referencing throughout this episode have definitely really helped me like get a better handle on. I've learned from my anxiety. I like to ask my anxiety, what are you trying to teach me? Or
Mm.
what are you asking of me? Or what do you need? Kind of asking those questions to learn more, because I really think that when anxiety shows up, or when depression shows up, or when anger shows up, it's trying to tell you something. And if we're
Mm.
calm and patient and compassionate enough to listen, I think we can learn a lot from that. But that takes work and it takes patience and practice. So you have everything you need. You are the expert in your own life, and you're whole and complete exactly as you are. And so the role of a coach, again, is to help bring that out. It's not to give you the answers. It's not to teach you how to do things or to presume that I know what you need. It's to help you figure out what that looks like for you and how it needs to fit into your own life.
When you are experiencing anxiety, like in your moments, do you have ways to pull yourself back to present moment or like grounding tools to bring yourself back to the moment?
Yeah, grounding techniques. So there are two that I really love. The first is square breathing. Are you familiar with that?
Is that like 4, 4, 4, 4 kind of a thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So you inhale for 4, you hold your breath for 4, you exhale for 4, and you pause with no air in your lungs for 4. And so it's a counting technique. And what I love about it is that it typically, when I'm in a moment of anxiety and I start doing that, I get through a cycle of square breathing really, really fast. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's quick. And as I breathe, I notice that my counting slows down, that my respiration rate slows down, that I'm more able to take more time on my inhale, take more time on my exhale. And that I find to be really calming. And then another one I learned actually from working with a hypnotist, and the really quick summary version of this technique is to envision a place where I feel a lot of peace and envision how I feel when I am in that peaceful place and in that peaceful moment. And as you envision that and breathe deeply and perhaps do it with your eyes closed, you rub your finger over your thumb. And as you do that, essentially you're sending the energy of that calm, peaceful moment into your thumbnail. And so then in moments when I'm experiencing kind of heightened anxiety, I will rub my finger over my thumbnail and I get that sense of peace and calm and ease back.
Thank you so much for all of this. This has been truly incredible. And I feel like you've just dropped so many beautiful gems. If listeners want to find out more about you, where are some good ways to find you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on and for asking. You can find me at SonjaEcklund.com, or you can find me on Instagram at SonjaEcklund. And both of those have direct links to the Etsy shop that we've talked about in this episode.
Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Week by Week. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Week by Week Podcast and visit our blog at weekbyweekpodcast.com. Check out the show notes for more information about our guests and additional resources I used and referenced during this episode. This podcast was produced during the COVID-19 pandemic and recorded remotely. Our show today was produced by me, Celeste Busa, and Dave Hill, and edited by Douglas Sarine and Colleen Beasley. Week by Week is a Gumption Pictures production.